morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. And welcome to the Manlius Informed Speaker Series. This is our 14th season of presenting the outstanding and prestigious Speaker Series. You know, I wrote that word, prestigious. Bringing highly informed professionals to inform and share what is happening and what is important in our daily lives and being. To start off the second part of our fall series, our guest is Morelli, who's the editorial and opinion leader at the Syracuse Media Group, which includes, among other media outlets, the Syracuse Post Standard and Syracuse.com. Maria is a member of a 5-person editorial board responsible for formulating, writing, representing the company's institutional opinion through editorials published on Syracuse.com and via the Post Standard. We invited Maria to come visit to share with her and the Syracuse Media Group's avenue of how that entity is going to deal with, report, analyze, deliver what they view as it pertains to the national presidential election, which is unfolding and unwrapping right in front of us, every moment of every day. Please welcome Maria Morelli.
Thank you, Lou, and thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
Turn the microphone.
Turn the mic.
There you go.
All right, good. It's my pleasure to be here today, and Lou did ask me to talk about media and the election, and I'll tell you a little bit first about how the editorial board is going to approach the election. As always, we will be endorsing in key races this year, a presidential race, the U.S. Senate race. There are 2 congressional races that are very important in our area that are being watched nationally. The NY24, John Katko is the incumbent, and NY22, where Richard Hanna is retiring, and that's an open seat. There also are a couple of state legislature races that we'll be watching, although even though the whole legislature is up for re-election, very few of them are actually facing opponents this year. So, as is our practice, we'll be having the candidates into our office in downtown Syracuse. We have them in together, and we talk about issues and try to assess their merits, and then we write editorials that support one or the other candidate that we think deserves consideration from the voters. That's the editorial board's role. And the newsroom's role, obviously, is to cover the race from a reporting standpoint, and the local races will go pretty much as always. It's the national race that's really an outlier this year, and so I'm going to talk mostly about some issues that are involved in the national media, because that filters down into how we talk about the news, what we decide to put on our site day to day, what's trending, what people are talking about on Facebook and Twitter. The national media set the agenda essentially for how we are viewing the race as a local media site, because that's what people are talking about, and so I'll get started here by, I think to a large degree sites like ours pick up on what our choices of stories and opinion to mix in with local news based on what's happening nationally. And as you know, this has been the most challenging election ever. What's going on here? Just use this. Oh, this is I meant to do this. This is the editorial board here, meeting with John Katko and Dan Maffei back in 2 years ago. I have a lot of pictures of the back of my head in these situations. So this is the main event, Clinton and Trump, and by now you've heard a lot about how the mainstream media has performed in this election cycle, and most of it's been uncomplimentary. Depending on your political persuasion, the media have failed to unmask Donald Trump as a charlatan or Hillary Clinton as crooked, are biased against third-party candidates, are too focused on, you can take your pick here, negativity, the horse race, predictions, Twitter feuds, spouses, foundations, marital infidelities, the damn emails, and other people in the media. The media is very good at focusing on what's happening in the media. And everyone's a media critic these days, even the Pope, and you should be too, as consumers of the news and as citizens in this great democracy we have. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how we got here and where I think it might lead, and give you some perspective to bring you, that you can bring to consuming the news between now and Election Day. But I'm hoping that your questions will actually guide the conversation. I don't have very much to say, really. First, I'll talk about the emergence of an unconventional candidate. He broke all the conventional rules and confounded the so-called normal ways that journalists cover political campaigns. Words and actions that used to disqualify candidates, they just don't anymore. And that's just been, the media just hasn't figured out how to handle that. Trump's mastery of the media has kept him at the center of attention throughout the primaries and since then. And if you look at this graphic here, you'll see just how much media attention Mr. Trump has received over the years, over the months of the primaries, as his opponents rose and fell. This goes up to the conventions, so when they got the nomination. So I think it's pretty clear that Trump has single-handedly dominated the conversation in the mainstream media. But he's had some partners, the networks, the newspapers, the online, the digital-only publications like Politico and Vox. They're trying to draw audience. And so coverage has largely been driven by ratings, clicks, and page views. And this story here is from earlier this year, but during the primary, CNN had a huge ratings boost. The president of CNN, Jeff Zucker, said something to the effect of how the race has been great for his company. And in an environment where the media, the legacy media, are trying to figure out how to make it work without traditional advertising. Print media has suffered great losses in print advertising and revenue. The financial constraints on the media just can't be ignored, and so what sells is often what you see on television. And that has resulted in quite a bit of what you would call free advertising for Mr. Trump. He's said during the debate on Monday that he hardly spent anything, and Hillary Clinton had spent, he said, hundreds of millions. I'm not sure it's quite that much, but free media has been a boon to Mr. Trump's campaign, and so the media has been somewhat complicit in how much coverage is given to Mr. Trump, because it's been unbelievable how much free advertising he's gotten. Unprecedented, I would say. And then there's social media, which is, it was around the last election. It's been around for a while. Twitter's been here probably a decade. But the candidates have gotten really good at using it, and they talk directly to their supporters through social media. Whether or not you might be tuned in, or you might not be, depending on how much you use Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, or there's a host of other sites. But in trying to reach the millennial generation, especially, the candidates are really going after social media as a way to bypass the traditional media, speak directly to their supporters, rally people around issues, and I think that's been important in this election, and it will be. We'll see how many millennials actually turn out, but I think that explains why you see Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump with the selfies I mean, that stuff goes right up on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, and so here we are in the selfie culture. The candidates also are limiting access to journalists in a way that hasn't happened before. I mean, for a while, Donald Trump had bans on certain reporters coming to his events or covering him in person. And Clinton is also guilty of that. She hadn't had a news conference in, I don't know, somebody was keeping track, like 262 days or something, and finally had a news conference. And now she has reporters on her plane with her. But you know, both candidates have been keeping the press the media at arm's length, and so when they do have interactions, the stakes are really much higher. I think that makes the journalists maybe that much more aggressive in trying to get a question in, because they know they're not going to have access. And maybe it's just a symptom of just how these campaigns are run now, where the candidates are crisscrossing the country in planes, and every moment of their day is booked. But there just doesn't seem to be the same kind of access that used to happen. And so then you get a lot of journalists just talking amongst themselves about what they think is happening. You know, they're trying to interpret signs or you know, speculate, or focus on other aspects of the race that really don't have anything to do with the candidates. And this is all happening in an atmosphere where we all know that trust in the media is at an all-time low, and not getting any better. Last year it was at 40%. This year it's 32%. How low can we go? God, I hope not much lower. But I mean, our industry has to realize that we have a serious problem here, and you know, attacking that is not. There's not one solution to that, but I think it's the erosion over time is now really beginning to take a toll on how people view the media, whether they believe the media, whether they think the media is biased, and that's a real problem. And I don't really know what the answer is. But I think it's interesting to see that you know, we can't pretend that we have your trust when 32%, only 32% have any trust, have trust in the media, according to this Gallup poll. The sheer volume of coverage of Donald Trump and its tone has led to a lot of cries of bias, and so the media has swung coverage to Clinton's emails. Some felt that was out of proportion, and of course others felt that it was not enough. So I think we have a lot of arguments about false equivalency that are hard to sort out. You know, with the number of statements that Trump has made that have riled up people. You know, how do you cover him in roughly the same proportion that you're covering Clinton? Some would argue that you can't, and I think that's where we're heading in this, where the argument about on the one hand, on the other may not apply here. I think the press has gotten a lot bolder as well about calling out candidates for repeated and outright lies. That's been a word that the media has been very reluctant to use over the years. You know, it's always been, you know, the candidate misspoke, the candidate isn't quite right, the candidate dissembled. Now this is, I think, unprecedented, where you have the word lie appearing in headlines. You have almost on the same day all these major news organizations doing stories about the lies of the week, and it's just an astounding development. So journalists, we do our navel-gazing in public. And this trajectory of this presidential campaign has gotten some journalism thinkers rethinking about how we practice political journalism. This quote here is from Jeff Jarvis, who's a professor of journalism at CUNY, who says, "The lesson of this election is that it's time to do something different because what we've always done is failing. Trump's nomination is evidence of that failure. If we recognize that it is our job to inform the public and we know we are failing, then we need to look for new and better ways to do our job. If aspirin doesn't fix what ails you, then it would be up to us, your news doctors, to rethink the diagnosis and treatment." It's pretty strong words from somebody who's teaching the next generation of journalists. Jay Rosen, who's another thinker, he's the author of the Press Think blog. He argues that the mainstream media practices political journalism that rests entirely on a mental picture of the American system in which the two major parties are similar actors, and, as New York Times editor Dean Beckett put it, warring philosophies. But that's been called into question with this campaign. Here's Rosen on the topic. The image of two similar parties with warring philosophies that compete for a tactical advantage also positions the mainstream press in a comfortable way between partisan players as a chronicler, a questioner, and a referee. Now imagine what happens when over time the base of one party, far more than the base of the other, begins to treat the press as a hostile actor and its own establishment as part of the rot. When it not only opposes but denies the legitimacy and loyalty to the state of the other side's leader, when it prefers conspiracy theory to party-friendly narratives that at least cope with verified fact, when it is scornful of the reality that in a divided system you never get everything you want. And here Rosen is echoing the views of Norman Ornstein and Thomas Mann, two political scientists who in 2012 wrote a book called something, I think it's It Really Is That Bad, or something like that, about the broken Congress and how the partisanship that has created gridlock in Washington has undermined politics in a way that we have to recognize and cope with. Ornstein, as an aside, had a very interesting online debate with Chris Cillizza of the Washington Post, who writes the Fix blog. It's a politics blog, and Cillizza is a practitioner of the kind of journalism that's called savvy journalism, where he does hot takes on whatever's of the moment, and it's a mix of opinion and reporting, and it's a different way of looking at journalism, but it's also, Ornstein would argue, Ornstein argues with Cillizza that it's not serving the public, and that there's much more substantive reporting that could be done instead of journalists talking about polls or talking about strategy or discussing the latest storm of tweets from Donald Trump. That there's actual reporting that needs to be done. David Farenthold of the Washington Post is an example of somebody who's been doing some good reporting about Trump's foundation, using basically shoe leather, going out there and asking people, did you get donations from Trump's foundation? Crowdsourcing through Twitter and other online social media, following tips. He's done a great job, and he probably won the Pulitzer Prize for that. Kurt Eichenwald of Newsweek has done an extensive investigation of Mr. Trump's foreign investments, which have national security implications, but I don't think anybody outside of the 10 people who subscribed to Newsweek saw that story. I mean, that's a little harsh, but I mean, Newsweek, as a news magazine, today is not the same as it was 20 years ago, and everybody, I used to get Newsweek and Time in my house, and now I get neither. So, I think there has been some really good reporting out there. it just has not gotten any traction in the noise, and it's very hard to cut through the noise. So, you know, what Rosen says is that this asymmetry between trying to cover one candidate and the other has just fried the circuits of the mainstream press, and I think he's right. We just don't know how to cover it. And so here we are. The question is, where do we go from here? I think we have some huge challenges ahead. First, there's the credibility gap that we have to address. And I think that, that starts with local news and also works its way up into national coverage. We have to figure out new ways of covering political campaigns that don't follow the rules as we've come to understand them. I mean, this campaign has broken all the rules, and we have to figure out a way of actually speaking to voters in a way that they're willing to listen. We also have to listen to voters. We have to stop talking to ourselves and start actually talking to people. I think this whole deep vein of discontent that Mr. Trump's campaign has tapped is something that we just have not explored enough. And I think that's a story we've missed in this campaign. And going forward, I think we have 5 weeks to the election. I think there's been recently some good reporting after the debate. The New York Times sent somebody to go to, I think, New Hampshire to talk to voters and that's, talk to women about how they felt after that debate. That was very illuminating. I think there is more reporting that needs to happen on trade and some of these larger issues that people just don't understand. And it's very complicated, and it's hard to do in 140 characters on Twitter. So the challenge is there, and I think we need to rise to it, because the consequences of not doing so are very important. I mean, you might say critical. The political candidates and eventually government are going to get to a point where they are immune to legitimate questioning and criticism. And I don't know that that's a country that we want to live in, where our government and our political candidates are just beyond accountability. We just need to find a way to break through and somehow get to that point where we can have the right questions in order to elicit honest answers from candidates in our government. That's really all I have to say. But I'm looking forward to your questions.
Hold on. Thank you. Let me start this off by asking, referring to the type of media that's available. The Syracuse Post Standard is limited to how many pages they can print regarding local news, state news, and national news. Maria knows that, Kennedy knows that, the Newhouse is. And if you're really into this election, you should be aware of the key media that's out there expressing their thoughts. Facebook, Twitter, the New York Times is just covers it from ear to ear, from eyeball to eyeball, from here to wherever. And if you're into the media, and Maria, I book it, and I never talked to her about it, looks at the New York Times every day, looks at the Wall Street Journal every day, looks at the Washington Post every day. And it's available on your screen. And you'll also be able to measure how the media looks at the candidates and how they look at the polls. The other website that I think has got some value is a thing called roll call. You look at roll call?
Yeah, occasionally.
Roll call. Roll call in the on the side. On the side gives you an indication of the polls, and they do an accumulation of the polls and gives you an idea of how the populace is looking at it. And the national, the networks are just full of it. Anywhere from MSNBC, to Fox, to CNN, they're just full of it. And you're welcome to, it depends on your interest level of seeking out what's going on and measuring it. Maria will gladly take your questions, what's going on. And Maria expressed exactly how the media group, the Syracuse Media Group, values and is going to seek out the interviews with the candidates. They're not going to interview Hillary, and they're not going to interview Donald, but they're going to get some street interviews too, I would imagine.
Well, I'm sure Mark Wiener's covering the campaign from Washington, but yeah, we have. Anyway, I'm publishing letters and commentaries all the time about what people think of various of the candidates, and so I'm not, and we're not shying away from that. Let me just say something about the networks before I take questions. When you watch CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and other cable networks, just be aware of who they're talking to. The campaigns have provided a lot of surrogates to the networks to advance the opinion of their candidate. So as long as you understand that the people talking, they are employed by the candidate, that gives you some idea of how much weight you want to put behind their opinions. The surrogates have really taken over network news, cable news. They need to fill up time, and so there's a lot. There's just
you
a lot.
You understand what a surrogate is?
Mm-hmm.
Or who they are? Hannity is a surrogate for Donald.
I'm speaking more like Corey Lewandowski, who was a campaign manager for Trump, is now a paid analyst on CNN. But he's got, he doesn't come at it from a neutral point of view. So as long as you know that, that's fine. But you need to understand it. That's all. Yes.
Yeah, I was listening to a pundit on the radio and talking about how we evolved to this point today with these candidates in this type of election. And he indicated that, of course, it was the anger that was developing over the years. But also he came out with this concept that we are now to be entertained by the media. And that this whole thing now, of all of the elections from here on out, unless it stops, is just simply going to be entertainment.
Some of that has to do with the candidate who is a master of the entertainment genre. I mean, this is reality television on steroids. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. I think all bets are off after this election. I don't know what it's going to be like after this. But I do think that the tenor of the coverage certainly has been audience driven and trying to attract audience and exploit emotion and trends get. A trend is like if one or two media are reporting something, then everybody else sort of swarms on it, and then it becomes something else. So I do think that there probably is something to that, but I think a lot of it also has to do with just who the candidate is, and he's a master of TV and the soundbite. He has CNN with a live shot of his plane, just waiting for him to get off of it. He's been able to capture our attention in a way that no one else ever has, and so that's just unprecedented. I don't know how to. Yes.
Well, it seems that millennials primarily get their news from social media. I don't know how many read newspapers or whatever. So, has there ever been a survey done about how that group of people, or any group, how they obtain information?
Yes, I'm sure there has. And I think you're right. Social media is, I think Facebook is the largest sort of news source of a majority of Americans now, which is, you know, it kind of, but Facebook is trying not to be a media outlet. They just want to be the pipe. They want to be the conduit for other people to share. So what you see tends to get reinforced because you are friends with people who probably think a lot like you. And so you can probably infer that millennials are getting their news from social media, but may not be getting a full picture. But you know, I think I wouldn't. I think they're pretty well informed as a class. Yes, sir.
Nowadays, my question is kind of long-term and short. Nowadays, it's the internet. People get the news from a lot of different sources, press, through the newspaper, and so on and so on. You alluded to the problem of trust, and along with that, maybe perception of the paper, press, and so on. I use an example. I'm not sure this is entirely accurate, but where CNN is owned by Time Warner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Time Warner is one of the top 25 contributors of Clinton's campaign.
Thank you.
Now,
He said that Time Warner is one of the top contributors of Clinton's campaign, and they own CNN.
So these people see that, and then they watch the program. How does that build trust and perception of what's happening against the fact that people who get their information from many sources? So a person would say, well, no, geez, I mean, what's going on here, I don't know about, I'm not sure how accurate it all is, so maybe I'll go more on Facebook and other sources who don't have the grounding that the press corps has, and maybe trying to, in quotes, stay neutral. So my real question is, what is the press themselves doing within their own community to help this issue of trust and misperception? What are you doing amongst yourselves as a group to try and help that?
Well, part of it is this public criticism that we've been exposing ourselves to. You know, I think journalists, by their actions, are trying to say that they are credible. I mean, I have a hard time. I mean, the owners of my company may have a political view, but I don't know what it is, and I don't know where they put their. I don't know that they are contributing to a campaign or to, you know. I'm sure they have their own politics, but as a journalist of integrity, I'm doing what I think is right from the journalistic point of view. I'm not guided by what their political views are. So I don't know how much you can infer from how a company spends its money, how that filters down to the person who's deciding which quote to use.
But the perception is there.
Yeah.
And my concern is that I don't see it getting any better unless the press get together themselves with some leadership to deal with it. And I'm not outsiders, I don't know, that's why I'm asking the question. Is there anything going on within the press corps themselves to deal with this?
There's a movement to nonprofit journalism, which hasn't gained a whole lot of traction, but it's starting to. There are sites like ProPublica that, you know, they're donation based, so I don't know that you will ever get rid of that idea that money is calling the shots. I mean, the fact remains that you need money to do this business. I mean, people need to get paid, and you know, so a nonprofit may insulate reporters from whoever the money is coming from, but you know, there are nonprofit and nonpartisan efforts happening that are, you know, that are online only, not print, that are trying to address this problem, both from a financial standpoint and from a, you know, a credibility and trust standpoint. So I don't have a good answer to your question. I'm sorry.
How do you miter in what Walt says, to the real ups and the A's and the B's. This column has donors, and this column has media. And how do you weigh that? How do you see that? I'm not sure you can, if you follow what I'm saying.
I don't follow.
Who influences those messages? Fox is owned by Murdoch. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And Murdoch has got a political,
Murdoch also owns the Wall Street Journal.
oh yeah, and the New York Post and a bunch of other things. And he's got a political agenda to some extent, and that's what you get. And why is he spending money to try to influence people to vote this particular manner for this particular entertainer? Where's his head? Why doesn't he just leave it alone? Let it go, let it all work out, say nothing. Where's the essence of that money? What is the reasoning behind them spending the money to promote that individual, to sell that?
Well, they think it's good business. I mean,
Oh,
clearly
God.
it's been good business for them.
Right,
And they are also,
Follow the money.
Power and greed, Louis.
well, there's also I think
Absolutely.
Fox tries to draw the line between opinion like Hannity and O'Reilly and news, and they tend to cross over. The Wall Street Journal, I think, from a news perspective, covers the news fairly straight. The editorial page is Rupert Murdoch's view.
If you look at the other side, I look at the Wall Street Journal on the op-ed side, what I call the op-ed side. There's some Trump messages that are not welcoming.
What do you mean, not welcoming? People?
Well, they pick on them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but the editorials are pro-Trump. Now they are. I mean, they were,
And they will
before the
be.
primary they weren't,
Yeah.
but they are now. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I think this is somewhat in line, but maybe less attached to power and greed. But how do journalists and the media as a unit question and do interviews knowing that they're not going to get an answer? So how do they teach new journalists how to handle this? I mean, maybe there's many exceptions, excuse me, like when Chris Matthews interviews Gary Johnson and traps him with a little quiz and really makes a fool out of him. But I'm wondering how the media can, day after day, ask questions and know that they're not going to get an answer. They're going to get a pivot into something else.
It's
They're
very.
not gonna get a straight answer.
It's very frustrating, but you got to keep asking the question. I mean, every time, you know, why hasn't Mr. Trump released his tax returns? I think that question ought to be asked every day until he does. I mean, but you at some point the question, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I
once his
don't-
tax return, once his tax return is released, then the Democrat side has got stuff to feed on, and that's what he's trying to avoid.
I don't think the answer is as important as keep asking the question, because that puts the question in everyone's mind. When is he gonna release his tax returns? And people know he's not gonna answer the question, but they keep, if you say the question enough times, it'll resonate into people's brains.
yes.
When there's an editorial written in the Post Standard, is there, and it's based upon certain articles that you've read or resource materials, is there a reason why you can't do links to those or footnotes or something, so that if people aren't particularly interested, they can follow through?
Well, we do try to put links into relevant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in your online editions, you could certainly do links. You know, it doesn't cost any more when you're doing an online edition, to put additional material in there, rather than just scanning in what somebody has written and laid out.
Does everybody understand her point?
Yes.
Okay. Where there's an editorial, then in blue, underlined,
Yeah.
you can link to the other article, the reference.
Well, the version that's on Syracuse.com does have links to other material. So if you're looking at the e-edition on your tablet or your computer, it may not, those links may not appear there. But if you look on Syracuse.com for that editorial, there are many links to, the articles which, the facts that are sources for facts that are cited or something like that. It's just not, it's not easily reproducible in the paper. And so that's, I mean, they're there. How we arrived at a decision may not be, something that we want to tell everybody, but certainly cite facts. We try to include links to the source material or the studies or the, same with commentaries or letters or any other material that we publish online. We do ask people for citations.
Yeah, you might consider just putting the links that somebody would have to type in your printed newspaper so that they appear also in the online version.
Well, I can ask about that.
Just a thought.
Okay. Yes.
How many of you from the newspaper interview the candidates as you showed a picture sitting around a table? How many of you are there?
There are 4 members of the editorial board now. I should have told you that. It's Tim Kennedy, the president of Syracuse Media Group, Stephen Spengros, the vice president for content, who's going to be here in a couple weeks, myself, and Stan Lindhorst, the special projects editor. So there's the 4 of us. There's usually 1 or 2 reporters, maybe Mark Wiener on the phone from Washington, D.C. There's usually the politics editor. Editorial board meetings are on the record, so if news breaks out, they're going to write a story about it. And there's a photographer, probably, a videographer, maybe. This year we're going to be using Facebook Live to bring the public in to the editorial board meeting. It's an experiment.
Are you interfacing with your brothers, your advanced brothers? You understand what that means?
Interfacing how?
Well, the guy in Cleveland, the guy in New Orleans, the guy in
We have access to their coverage, so we are tapping into the national. There is Advanced Publications or Advanced Digital, which owns our company, also owns Cleveland.com, NOLA.com, a bunch of papers in Michigan that are under the umbrella called MLive. The Portland Oregonian is Oregon Live. Papers in Birmingham, Alabama are grouped under AL.com. So some of that content is shared among the sites. There's not like a de facto wire service, but we certainly have picked up material from Cleveland or from Michigan when it's been pertinent to the campaign. Henry Gonzalez from the Cleveland Plain Dealer has been covering politics, and Ohio's a swing state. It's going to be.
According to the New York Times this morning.
Well, see, another conventional wisdom busted. But anyway, Ohio's going to be a hotly contested state, whether or not it's a battleground. And so we are picking up some coverage from them, yes.
It's interesting that the election is you only get the news by the media. It's not, the media today is a different media, of course, than it was 40 years ago. Before, you bought the paper and read it thoroughly, stone to stone. Today, there's a lot of ways to get the news. And if you don't take advantage of it, I don't know how many hours of the day you have to do that. It's there to do it. And I don't know, personally, I'm not totally knowledgeable or aware Think about that. The television does, because you get a picture of that personality, that temperament, the way they talk, the way they dress, the way they respond. But you don't get that through the print media, and you don't get it through even the printed item on the
From
Facebook.
Saturday Night Live. It's gonna be a big
Or
thing.
Colbert,
We're all
or,
getting ready for
or,
this.
yeah.
Well, it is meat for those guys. It's dead on.
Oh, yeah.
Is this election, contrary to some things, the media loves this. If the media could have this 365 days a year, every year of our lifetime, they would love it. This guy Zucker, is that his name, from CNN? He's got a history. He admits it. He loves it. It's cash. I mean.
Well, local TV stations are gonna be in the money in the next, not too distant future as the campaigns for Congress ramp up. You're already seeing attack ads from outside money. Both the Democrats and Republican campaign committees on behalf of Deacon and Catco. So it's a bonanza for TV, not so much for us.
And also, are you aware that political ads cost more money per eye than what Fusillo is paying, and what Romano is paying, and what everybody else is paying? That political ads are very expensive to run on television, much more pricier than everything else.
Well, there's a finite number of minutes in the day, and so supply and demand takes over there. Yes, sir.
When are you gonna have your endorsements? When are we gonna hear those?
Soon. Between now and election day.
Really? Clever idea.
Yes, we'll be having them soon.
And it'll be right up, once you decide, it'll go right up on the internet.
Pretty much.
And does the Post Standard have a Facebook?
Syracuse.com is on Facebook.
So you got a friend in?
Yes, you gotta like it. Yeah, please do. Yes.
I would expect that most media groups of any size probably has a fact checker. Do you think that the media exposes these facts and checking them to the degree they should? Are they obligated to? How do you feel about that?
Fact checking has exploded in this campaign. In addition to PolitiFact, there's factcheck.org. The Washington Post has a fact checker. AP has a fact checker. In fact, I've been trying to run fact checkers as often as I can. There are too many. There are more than I can deal with. But the idea that facts are being checked. I don't know if anybody's listening, but it's out there. And if you look on PolitiFact, PolitiFact has kind of this funny pants on fire thing where it's a little bit flip. And they have their logo upside down if somebody flip-flops. And they have a little scale about whether or not how true somebody's statement is. So I think as a tool, fact checking is being well used in this campaign. I don't know if the audience is finding it.
The
Does it do
question
any good?
really was, how do you feel about it? Do you think that it's an obligation
Absolutely, absolutely.
of journalists to expose the
Absolutely, and I was a little bit bemused by the debate over the debate about whether Lester Holt should fact check during the debate, and
How did he do that mechanically? He'd have to have an earpiece stuck in his ear for somebody to say, Lester, this
no,
dude
you'd have to
screwed
be
up."
very well prepared.
Yeah, oh yes, you.
And I've done a couple of TV debates which are nerve-wracking, like you wouldn't believe, but it's not that easy to interrupt the candidates when they're standing like 20 feet away from you and they're on a roll and they're not looking at you and they're looking at the camera. It's very difficult to fact check, but I do think that a journalist's obligation is to fact check, and I'm glad. I think Lester Holt walked that line pretty well on Monday. Not being overbearing, but also, you know, really pressing the candidates to address an answer, you know, give an answer.
When you have an editorial, let's kind of think that subject through. When you're in this room, around a table, and you bring in a candidate, you prepare the questions and then you try to keep that candidate on target, on message. Isn't that part of the interview process? Not too different than the debate process?
Very similar, I think. Yeah, we do prepare questions in advance. We do let the candidates, I mean, we have more time than you have on television, so, you know, we usually give candidates an hour or maybe a little bit more. But we do try to keep the candidates focused on the questions, try to get them off their talking points and to actually answer, you know, how they feel about things. And also give their opponent an opportunity to have his or her say. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but we try to keep it informal, so it's not like you have 2 minutes and then you have 2 minutes and then you have 3 minutes for rebuttal and then you know, it's a little less programmed than that.
Both candidates are not in the same room at the same time.
Usually they are.
Really?
Yes. We try to do that because.
Then it really becomes a debate.
Well, we try to do that because, well, it cuts down on the number of meetings you have to have. I mean, it's practically, but also I think it's good to see how they interact with each other, and you know, to the point about Lester Holt, it is the responsibility of the other guy to correct or to challenge the candidate that they're running against. So, you know, it's not just the journalists who should be questioning, but you know, there has to be some interplay there.
So in that room with that video photographer, we're going to be able to see that thing from stem to stern?
Well, that's the plan. I don't know if it's going to work out.
Unsponsored.
Well, it'll be on Facebook Live on Syracuse.com's channel. So like Syracuse.com and you'll get a notification if it happens. If it happens.
So how will we know it? How can we tell these 52 people in this room that that's going to be? You want to send me and I can send that out or
Well,
something like that?
I'm sure we'll try to publicize it. So we want people, if we're going to do it, we'll ask people to watch.
I would imagine you're not going to do it without.
I mean, it's going to be something new, so I don't know. First of all, I don't know if it's really going to come off, but if it does, we'll certainly let you know.
We'll try it.
It's
Any
a-
more questions?
Yeah, Mr. Trump has criticized 3 moderators in 3 different times. I can't remember anybody else ever going after the moderators like that. Is my memory wrong, or is?
Well, Candy Crowley got quite a bit of heat a couple years ago when she corrected Mitt Romney
Right.
midstream about I can't remember the topic now. Well, the moderators are chosen by this independent debate commission that both parties have control over. So, you know, and I think they've chosen fine moderators. I have no problem with the moderators they've chosen. After, you know, Trump tried to, before the debate, the Trump surrogates were trying to say, well, Holt should not be fact-checking. You know, that was the narrative before the debate. The moderator ought to stay out of it, let the candidates just go at it. And so that became a kind of a talking point before the debate. During the debate, I think that sort of put Holt in an odd position, but he handled it pretty well, I thought. And going forward, I don't think that the debate moderators are going to be shy at all about trying to keep the candidates on point. But we'll also see if Mr. Trump shows up to the debates. I mean, that's another narrative that's starting to take hold. The town hall debate is going to be a tough format for him. So I don't know.
Who's going to be the moderator for the next one?
That's a good question. I don't know offhand.
Anderson Cooper.